That night, I did not find a heartwarming family secret. I found a notarized signature erasing 15 years of my sweat. I did not scream. I simply left, taking the one thing they never actually owned: my craftsmanship. By the time our biggest client called to say he hired me, not the building, I realized the cold truth. My parents had not just betrayed me, they had turned me into a shield for a massive debt bomb. My name is Paisley Hughes, and at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in Ashford Ridge, Ohio, I was the only living soul inside Carter and Forge Metalworks. The rest of the town had gone dark hours ago, tucking itself into the quiet decay typical of the Rust Belt, but inside the corrugated steel walls of the main fabrication bay, the air was still vibrating with the violence of industry. It smelled of ozone, grinding dust, and the sharp copper tang of superheated steel. I was currently bent over a structural support beam that my father, Frank, had tagged with red tape earlier that afternoon. He had looked at the undercut on the flange, shook his head, and told me to scrap it. He said the integrity was compromised, and that we would just have to eat the cost of the material. That was Frank's way. When things got difficult, or required a finesse that his hands had lost 20 years ago. He threw money or waste at the problem, but we did not have the money to throw. I knew the books better than he thought I did, or at least I thought I did at the time. So, I was saving it. I adjusted the amperage on the TIG welder, dialing it down with a precision that felt more like instinct than calculation. My back ached. A dull throb settled deep in my lumbar spine, a familiar companion after a 14-hour shift. I lowered my welding hood. The world went black. Save for the green glow of the ready light, I initiated the arc. For the next 20 minutes, there was nothing in the universe but the puddle of molten metal. It was a hypnotic, dangerous dance. I had to wash the weld pool over the defect, feeding the filler rod in with a rhythmic dip-dip-dip motion of my left hand while my right hand guided the torch. It required the steadiness of a neurosurgeon and the heat tolerance of a demon. This was where I lived. This was the language I spoke fluently, better than English, better than the awkward silences that filled the dinner table at home. When I terminated the arc, the gas post-flow hissed for a few seconds, cooling the tungsten. I flipped my hood up. The weld was perfect. The dimes were stacked in a seamless row, shimmering with blues and golds before fading to silver as they cooled. It was not just salvaged, it was stronger than the original steel. I had just saved the shop $1,200 in raw materials and another 3 days of lead time. I set the torch down on the bench, exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding for 15 years. I peeled off my heavy leather welding gloves. My hands were stained with soot and grease. The grime settled into the creases of my knuckles and the calluses on my palms. I wiped my forehead with the back of my arm, leaving a streak of gray across my skin. I needed water. My throat felt like I had swallowed a handful of sand. I walked from the fabrication floor to the front office. The transition was abrupt, moving from the cavernous, echoey shop to the carpeted silence of the administrative area. The fluorescent lights here hummed with a different, more annoying frequency. The office was a monument to the 1990s, filled with beige filing cabinets and a fax machine that Frank refused to throw away. My mother, Marla, usually kept this place organized, but lately, piles of paper had been migrating from the filing cabinets to the tops of desks. We were busy, too busy. It was a good problem to have, or so they told me. "We are building the future, Paisley," Frank would say. "Just push through this quarter." I grabbed a lukewarm bottle of water from the mini-fridge and downed half of it in one gulp. I crushed the empty plastic bottle and turned to toss it into the large recycling bin next to Frank's desk. The bin was overflowing. Frank had a bad habit of not emptying it until things spilled onto the floor. As I tossed the bottle, it bounced off a stiff piece of cardboard and knocked a stack of papers onto the carpet. I sighed. "Come on, Frank," I whispered to the empty room. I knelt to pick up the mess. It was mostly junk mail, supplier catalogs, and empty coffee cups. But as I scooped up a handful of shredded envelopes, my fingers brushed against a thick blue legal folder. It was crumpled, as if someone had squeezed it in a fist before jamming it deep into the trash. trying to bury it under the daily refuse. The label on the tab was handwritten in my mother's script. Transfer of ownership. I froze. My knees were pressed against the thin commercial carpet. The shop silence, which usually felt peaceful, suddenly felt heavy, like the pressure drop before a tornado touches down. We did not have any ownership transfers pending. We were a family business, Carter and Forge. The Carter was long dead, my grandfather's partner, and the Forge was us, the Hughes family. I opened the folder. Inside was a document titled Deed of Gift and Transfer of Equity. It was a dense block of legal text, but the key names jumped out at me with the clarity of a neon sign in a dark alley. Grantor, Frank Hughes and Marla Hughes. Grantee, Logan Hughes. I blinked, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Maybe this was a draft. Maybe this was some estate planning for the distant future. A tax loophole thing Marla was exploring. Then I saw the date. It was dated October 14th, 3 years ago. My eyes scanned down to the bottom of the page. There were signatures. Frank's jagged, impatient scrawl, Marla's neat, looped cursive, and Logan's signature. Practiced, sharp, assertive. And next to them, the stamp of a notary public, embossed, real. I sat back on my heels, the folder resting on my thighs. My left hand was still trembling slightly from the muscle fatigue of the welding, but my right hand, holding the paper, was stone still. 3 years. They had transferred the shop to my brother 3 years ago. A wave of nausea hit me, so violent I thought I might throw up the water I had just drunk. I looked at the date again. 3 years ago. I tried to remember where I was on October 14th 3 years ago. I remembered. I was here. I was right here, in the bay, rebuilding the hydraulic system on the shear because we could not afford a repair technician. I had spent 16 hours covered in hydraulic fluid, slipping on the slick floor, busting my knuckles until they bled, all to make sure we could cut the steel for the Anderson order. And while I was doing that, Frank and Marla were in a lawyer's office, signing the company over to Logan, my younger brother, the one who wore Italian loafers to the shop floor and stepped gingerly over extension cords like they were vipers, the one who had an MBA on the wall but could not tell the difference between mild steel and stainless if his life depended on it. Logan, who liked to talk about scaling operations and optimizing workflows, but had never, not once, struck an arc or ground a bevel. I stood up. The movement felt mechanical, like I was operating a body that did not belong to me anymore. I walked out of the office, the folder still clutched in my hand, and went back onto the shop floor. The high bay lights buzzed overhead. I looked at this place, really looked at it. For the last 15 years, I had treated this building like it was my church and my child. I knew every noise the air compressor made. I knew which floor tiles were loose in the break room. I knew exactly how to shim the number 3 press brake so it bent true. I walked over to the welding table I had just left. The Tiggy torch was cooling on its stand. The fume extractor arm was still positioned exactly where I had set it. I looked at the jig on the table next to it. It was a complex apparatus of clamps and steel guides designed to hold tubular frames in place for welding. I had designed that jig. I had drawn it in CAD, cut the parts on the plasma table, and assembled it myself on a Sunday, unpaid, because I knew it would cut our production time by 40%. Frank had patted me on the back and said, "Good work, kid. That is money in the bank." I looked at the rack of drawings hanging on the wall. My name was in the drawn by box on every single one of them. Not Logan's. Mine. I walked deeper into the shop, my boots crunching softly on the metal shavings that littered the concrete. I passed the CNC plasma cutter. I had spent 2 weeks sleeping on a cot in the office to teach myself the programming language for that machine because the operator quit without notice. I became the expert because someone had to be. "It is for the family," Frank always said. "We are building this for all of us. One day, this will all be worth it," Marla would say when she told me there was no money for a bonus this year, or a raise, or even a decent healthcare plan. Lies. It was all a lie. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not an oversight. It was a strategy. They knew. For 3 years. They looked me in the eye every morning. They watched me ruin my skin, inhale toxic fumes, and burn my retinas. They watched me turn down job offers from aerospace companies in the city, offers that came with six-figure salaries and benefits. Because I believed I was investing sweat equity into my own future, they let me believe it. Because if I knew the truth, that I was just an employee, and a poorly paid one at that, I would have left. And if I left, the shop would die. Logan could not run this place. Logan could not turn on the lights without a manual. I looked down at the paper in my hand. It was not just a legal document. It was a receipt for my life. They had sold me. They had sold my loyalty, my skill, and my time to my brother for absolutely nothing. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. I expected rage. I expected to want to grab a sledgehammer and start smashing the windows of the office. I expected to want to scream until my throat bled. But there was no scream. The heat in my chest was vanishing, replaced by something incredibly cold. It was the same feeling I got when a piece of steel snapped under a load test. It was a clean, sharp break. The structural integrity was gone. There was no fixing it. You do not weld over a fracture like that. You scrap the part. I was not the heir. I was not the partner. I was the mule. I was the dray horse they worked until it collapsed, while the show pony pranced around the paddock waiting for the cameras. I looked at the Carter Forge logo painted on the far wall. It was peeling slightly at the edges. I was done. I did not pace. I did not cry. My breathing slowed down. My heart rate, which had spiked when I found the folder, dropped into a slow, heavy rhythm. I looked at my hands again. These hands could weld aluminum as thin as a soda can. These hands could read a blueprint and visualize a three-dimensional structure in seconds. These hands had built this company's reputation. They thought they owned the shop. They thought the deed, the building, the machines. They thought that was the business. They were wrong. I folded the document carefully. I did not crumple it. I folded it along the existing creases, smoothing it out with a terrifying calmness. I unzipped the breast pocket of my grimy work jacket and slid the paper inside, right next to my heart. It felt heavy there, like a plate of lead armor. I looked at the large analog clock on the wall above the break room. It was 11:55. I rolled my shoulders back, feeling the tension shift. I was not a daughter anymore. I was not a sister. I was a professional who had just realized her contract had been violated. I checked my own wristwatch, timing the next few minutes in my head. I had things to do. I had to move with precision. There was no room for error. I stared at the second hand sweeping around the face of my watch. It looked like a scalpel slicing through time. I was about to perform surgery. I was about to cut out the tumor that had been killing me for 3 years, and the patient, this family, this shop, was not going to survive the procedure. To understand why I stood there with a stolen deed burning a hole against my chest, you have to understand the architecture of the Hughes family. We were not just a family, we were a hierarchical structure, built much like the buildings I helped construct, but with a fatal flaw in the foundation. Frank, my father, was the founder. In the mythology of our house, he was the titan who pulled the company out of the mud with his bare hands. He was the face of the legacy, the man who shook hands at the Chamber of Commerce meetings and told stories about the good old days when men were steel and steel was real. But the truth, which I had covered for years, was that Frank was tired. His hands shook too much to run a bead, and his patience for the technical evolution of the industry had died a decade ago. He was a figurehead, a statue erected to a version of himself that no longer existed. Marla, my mother, was the mortar. She filled the cracks. She handled the books, the public relations, and the emotional manipulation required to keep the statue of Frank upright. She was the one who smoothed over missed deadlines with a honeyed voice on the telephone and then turned around to scream at the floor crew, meaning me, to work faster. She managed the narrative. In Marla's world, perception was the only reality that mattered. If the books looked balanced and the lawn was mowed, the house was not on fire, even if the basement was full of smoke. And then there was Logan. If Frank was the foundation and Marla was the mortar, Logan was the neon signage on the roof, flashy, expensive to maintain, and completely useless when it came to keeping the rain out. My brother had returned from business school 3 years ago, right around the time the deed was secretly signed. I realized with a fresh pang of nausea, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He did not walk into the shop. He made entrances. He would stroll onto the fabrication floor wearing polished Italian leather shoes, stepping gingerly over air hoses and power cables, as if the grime of the shop was a contagion. He was terrified of dirt. I mean that literally. I watched him once pick up a piece of angle iron with 2 fingers, holding it away from his body like a dirty diaper, before wiping his hands on a sanitizing wipe he kept in his pocket. Yet, this was the man who sat in client meetings and used words like synergy, vertical integration, and workflow optimization. He loved to talk about optimizing the shop. He would stand on the catwalk overlooking the floor, pointing down at me while explaining to Frank that we needed to streamline the throughput. The irony was painful. Logan did not know what the throughput actually was. I remember a day, about 6 months after he started managing, when he came down to my station while I was TIG welding a pharmaceutical-grade stainless steel tank. "Paisley," he had said, shouting over the hum of the ventilation fans, "why are we using these expensive rods? I saw some filler metal in the catalog for half the price. We need to cut overhead." I had flipped up my hood and looked at him. "This is 316L stainless. Logan, we are making a tank for a chemical reactor. If I use the cheap carbon steel rods you are looking at, the weld will contaminate the tank. It will corrode within a week, and the client will sue us for millions of dollars." He had blinked, his face blank. He looked at the silver rod in my hand, and then at the steel table. "Well," he said, adjusting his silk tie, "just make it work. Innovation comes from constraint." He walked away feeling like a leader. I went back to work knowing he could not distinguish between carbon steel and surgical-grade stainless. To him, it was all just gray metal. It was just stuff to be sold. That was the dynamic. And then there was me. I was the load-bearing beam. In architecture, the load-bearing beam is often hidden behind drywall or buried in the ceiling. You do not see it. You do not admire it. You do not paint it bright colors. But if you remove it, the roof collapses and kills everyone in the building, because I was durable, because I was silent, and because I never broke. My family had made the dangerous assumption that I was permanent. They assumed I was part of the building's physics, a law of nature rather than a human being. I looked down at my hands. They were a topographic map of the company's survival. There was a jagged white scar across my left thumb from the time the bandsaw guard failed because Frank refused to buy a replacement part. There was a constellation of small, circular burn marks on my forearms from overhead welding sparks that managed to find their way past my leathers. My knuckles were permanently swollen, twice the size of Marla's delicate fingers. These scars were not just injuries. They were receipts. They were the physical evidence of every time I had fixed a mistake, rushed an order, or saved a contract. I thought about the equipment in my corner of the shop, the variable speed angle grinder I used for finishing work. I bought that. It cost me $200 out of my own pocket because the shop's grinder had a frayed cord that shocked me every time I plugged it in, and Marla said the equipment budget was exhausted for the quarter. The precision digital calipers in my top drawer? Mine? $400? I needed them to hold tolerances of 5/1000ths of an inch for our aerospace clients. And Frank had told me to just eyeball it with a tape measure. The heavy-duty clamp set for the jig table? Mine. I had spent thousands of dollars of my own wages that were already 20% below market rate, to subsidize this business. I did it because I thought I was investing. I thought, we are tight right now, but when the business grows, it will be ours. They played on that. They played on the we. "We are all making sacrifices," Marla would say, usually while planning her vacation to Florida. "The budget is just so tight. Paisley, you understand? You are the practical one." I was the practical one. the reasonable one, the one who did not need praise, just work. I remembered a client visit from 2 months ago. It was a representative from a high-end architectural firm in Chicago. They were commissioning a decorative brass staircase for a hotel lobby. It was a nightmare project. Curved stringers, hidden welds, mirror finish. I had spent 3 weeks polishing that brass. My fingerprints were practically sanded off. When the client arrived, the staircase was gleaming in the center of the bay, a golden ribbon of perfection. The client, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena, had run her hand along the underside of the railing, the hardest place to hide a flaw. She found nothing but glass-smooth metal. "This is incredible craftsmanship," she had said, looking genuinely impressed. "The consistency of the grain direction is masterful." I was standing right there, wiping my hands on a rag, ready to explain the process. Frank stepped in front of me. "Thank you, Elena. We pride ourselves on our standards. We have a very rigorous training program here at Carter and Forge." He took credit for my hands. He took credit for the thousands of hours I spent alone, learning by trial and error, because he certainly never taught me. Then Marla chimed in, gesturing to Logan. And of course, Logan here managed the project flow. He made sure the logistics allowed for this level of detail. "It is all about modern management." Logan nodded solemnly, as if he had done anything other than ask me twice a day when it would be done so he could bill it. "Great team," Elena had said. She glanced at me for a split second, a flicker of confusion, but then Frank steered her toward the office for coffee. I stayed with the brass. I stood there, invisible, polishing a smudge that did not exist. At the time, I told myself it did not matter. I told myself that the client knew, that the work spoke for itself, but standing there now in the midnight silence of the shop, the memory tasted like bile. They did not just steal my money, they stole my name. They erased me from the narrative of my own life, and suddenly, the timing of the deed made horrific sense. 3 years ago was when I finished my advanced certification in robotic welding automation. It was when I started getting headhunted by recruiters on LinkedIn. I had shown the messages to Frank, thinking he would be proud. I remembered the look on his face. It was not pride, it was panic. They knew. They knew back then that I was becoming too valuable to keep on a leash. If I knew I was just an employee, I would have taken one of those jobs. I would have left for a salary that doubled what they paid me, with a 401k and paid time off. If I left, the shop died. It was that simple. Logan could not weld. Frank could not see. Without me, the Carter and Forge quality was just a myth. So they locked me in. They did not lock me in with a contract or a raise. They locked me in with a lie. They let me believe I was building my own inheritance so that I would work harder than any employee ever would. They leveraged my love for them, my loyalty to the family name, and they weaponized it against me. They hid the transfer for 3 years, not because they were ashamed, but because they were calculating. They were milking the cow one last time before selling the farm. I looked at the heavy steel I-beam I had just repaired. There is a concept in metallurgy called fatigue limit. You can stress a piece of metal over and over again. You can bend it, twist it, and load it with weight. For a long time, it looks fine. It holds. It does exactly what it is supposed to do. It does not crack. It does not whine. But inside the crystalline structure of the metal, microscopic dislocations are piling up. The stress is accumulating at a molecular level. And then, one day, without any warning, without any dramatic bending or warping, it reaches the limit. It snaps. It is a catastrophic failure. The metal does not yield slowly. It breaks instantly and completely. The beam that held the roof up for 50 years is suddenly 2 useless pieces of iron on the floor. I felt that snap in my chest. It was not loud. It was not a breakdown. It was simply the physics of the situation catching up with reality. The load-bearing beam had just experienced critical failure. I was not sad anymore. I was not even angry in the way people usually understand anger. I was broken in the way a machine breaks. Functionality had ceased. The mechanism that allowed me to care about their profits, their reputation, and their comfort had sheared off. I looked around the shop one last time. It looked different now. It did not look like home. It looked like a factory floor where I used to work. "Okay," I said to the empty room. "Let us see how the sign holds up the roof." I waited until 3 in the morning. There's a specific kind of silence that falls over an industrial park in the deep middle of the night. It is heavier than the silence of a suburb. In a neighborhood, you might hear a dog bark or a distant siren, but out here, among the tilt-up concrete warehouses and chain-link fences, the silence is absolute. It is a vacuum. I drove my truck around the back of the building, keeping the headlights off until the very last second. I parked right up against the loading dock door, the engine ticking as it cooled. I sat there for a moment, listening. No security patrol, no motion lights, just the hum of the transformer on the utility pole. I did not feel like a daughter sneaking out of her parents' house. I felt like a repo man. I was here to reclaim collateral on a defaulted loan. I keyed into the side door. The alarm keypad beeped at me. A rhythmic, high-pitched demand. I punched in the code. 0, 4, 2, 8, my birthday. Of course it was my birthday. Frank could never remember any other combination. So he used the day I was born as the security code for the building he had just stolen from me. The irony was so thick, I could taste it like metal shavings in the back of my throat. The green light flashed, disarmed. I moved through the darkness of the shop floor by memory. I did not turn on the overhead sodium lights. They took too long to warm up, and they were too bright. I navigated by the moonlight filtering through the high clerestory windows. The shadows of the press brakes and the shears stretched out across the concrete like sleeping giants. I went to my station first. This was not a looting. I was not here to strip copper wire or steal petty cash. I was here for surgical extraction. I opened my rolling tool cabinet. The drawers slid out on ball bearings with a smooth, oiled whisper. I began to pack. First, my welding hood. It was a Speedglass 9100 FX with an ad-flow respirator system. I had paid $2,000 for it 3 years ago because the passive hoods the shop provided were giving me neck strain and the ventilation in the shop was garbage. It was covered in stickers from vendors and a few I had added myself. A skull wearing a hard hat, a lightning bolt. I placed it gently into the passenger seat of my truck. Next, the metrology gear, the Starrett combination squares, the digital protractors, the thread gauges. I had bought every single one of them. I picked up the dial indicator with the magnetic base, the one I used to true up the lathe chucks because nobody else knew how to do it. I placed it in its red plastic case and snapped the latches shut. Click, click. The sound was loud in the empty shop. I moved to the fabrication table. Bolted to the surface was a complex steel fixture, a jig I had designed for the repeatable welding of the architectural railing balusters we were making for the library renovation. Technically, the steel belonged to the shop, but the design, the geometry, the logic that allowed us to produce 20 rails a day instead of 5, that was mine. I took a wrench from my back pocket. I did not steal the jig. That would be theft. Instead, I disassembled the critical components. I unbolted the custom-machined stops and the toggle clamps I had purchased from McMaster Carr with my own credit card. Without these specific clamps and stops, the jig was just a pile of scrap metal. It was a skeleton without muscles. I left the base plate bolted to the table, staring up at the ceiling like a dead thing. I worked efficiently, no wasted movement. My breathing was steady. I was checking items off a mental inventory list. TIG torch consumables kit, mine. Taken. Tungsten grinder diamond wheel, mine. Taken. The ergonomic floor mat I stood on for 10 hours a day, mine. I rolled it up and threw it in the truck bed. Then, I walked to the office. This was the dangerous part. The physical tools were one thing. The intellectual property was another. I sat down at the computer terminal I used for CAD work. It was a dusty Dell tower that hummed like a failing refrigerator. I booted it up. The blue glow of the monitor washed over the darkened room, illuminating the photos on the wall. Pictures of Logan holding a ribbon-cutting scissors. Pictures of Frank shaking hands with the mayor. No pictures of me. I logged into the system. Most fabricators just cut what they are given. I did not. I designed. For the last 5 years, whenever a client came in with a napkin sketch, I was the one who turned it into a DXF file for the plasma cutter. I was the one who unfolded the sheet metal in the software to calculate the bend deductions. I opened the design software. It was licensed to the company, but the library, the repository of custom blocks, the templates for our standard parts, the parametric models for the spiral staircases we were famous for, that was stored on my personal cloud drive. I had set it up that way so I could work from home on weekends when Frank was panicking about deadlines. I did not delete the company files. I was careful. I left every file that belonged to a specific, finished job exactly where it was. But I disconnected the drive. I opened the settings menu and clicked Sign Out. Then I clicked Forget Device. In an instant, the library tab on the left side of the screen went blank. Thousands of hours of pre-configured geometry vanished. The software was still there, but it was lobotomized. If Logan wanted to design a stair stringer tomorrow, he would have to draw every single line, arc, and bolt hole from scratch. He would have to do the math, and Logan did not know the math. I shut down the computer. The screen went black, returning the room to shadows. I turned to the bookshelf behind Marla's desk. There was a row of 3-ring binders. I pulled out 3 of them. The first was the weld procedure specifications. I had written these. I had qualified them with the testing lab. These were the recipes that proved our welds met the structural code. The second was the quality assurance manual. This was the book I showed to inspectors. It contained the checklists, the material trace logs, the calibration records. The third was my personal notebook. It was a battered black moleskin filled with my handwriting. Settings for the machines, workarounds for the old equipment, contact numbers for the good suppliers who would rush a delivery for me, not for Frank. I stacked the binders in my arms. These were not company assets in the traditional sense. They were my brain on paper. Without them, the shop was just a building full of machines that nobody knew how to calibrate. I walked back out to the shop floor. My truck was full. The bed was loaded with my toolbox. The cab was filled with my delicate instruments. I did a final sweep. I stood in the center of the bay, right where the Carter and Forge logo was painted on the floor in yellow epoxy. It felt strange. I had spent 15 years filling this space with noise and light. Now, I was leaving it hollow. I looked at the dark welding booths. They looked like empty confessionals. I walked to the front door, the main entrance where customers came in. I took the master keyring out of my pocket. It had the key to the front door, the back gate, the tool crib, the office, and the truck fleet. I walked over to Frank's desk. It was cluttered with unpaid invoices and half-empty coffee cups. I cleared a small space right in the center. Pushing aside a threatening letter from a steel vendor, I placed the keys on the desk. The metal jingled softly, a sound of finality. I reached for a notepad and a pen from the cup holder. My hand hovered for a second. I thought about writing a manifesto. I thought about writing a detailed breakdown of exactly why they were terrible parents and even worse business partners. I thought about laying out the math of my betrayal. But what was the point? They would not understand. They would read it and call me dramatic. They would read it and tell themselves I was having a breakdown. So I wrote 5 words. Good luck with the sparks. I tore the page off and set it under the keyring so it wouldn't blow away when the air conditioning kicked on. I walked out the front door and let it lock behind me. The latch clicked, a dry mechanical sound. I got into my truck. The cab smelled like old coffee and the fresh leather of my welding hood. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, shattering the silence of the parking lot. I put it in gear and drove toward the gate. As I pulled onto the main road leading out of Ashford Ridge, I checked the rearview mirror. I expected to feel a pull. I expected to see the silhouette of the building and feel a wave of grief. This was the place where I had learned to weld. This was the place where I had bonded with my father, or thought I had. This was the place where I had broken my bones and scarred my skin. But as the building shrank in the mirror, disappearing into the pre-dawn fog, I felt nothing, literally nothing, It was not sadness. It was not relief. It was the feeling of a phantom limb. The arm is gone, but the nerves are still firing, trying to clench a fist that no longer exists. I was driving away from my own history, amputating 15 years of my life, and the only sensation I had was a dull, buzzing emptiness. I drove past the high school where Logan had been voted prom king while I was working the night shift to pay for a new compressor. I drove past the diner where Marla liked to hold court and tell her friends how gifted her children were. I kept driving. The sky in the east was starting to turn a bruised purple, the first hint of sunrise. My phone, sitting in the cup holder, suddenly lit up. It vibrated against the plastic, a harsh, angry buzz. I glanced down. It was 7:10 in the morning, Mom calling. I looked at the screen. The name flashed, demanding attention. Marla was awake. She must have just gotten the notification that the alarm had been disarmed and then rearmed. Or maybe Frank had walked in early and seen the empty space where my tools used to be. The phone buzzed again, and again. The storm had made landfall. I reached out, but not to answer. I pressed the power button on the side of the phone and held it down. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The screen went black. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat next to my welding hood. I did not know where I was going. I had a tank of gas and $3,000 in my personal savings account. I had my tools, I had my hands, and for the first time in my life, I had absolutely no one to carry but myself. I sat in a booth at a diner called Sal's, located just off the exit ramp of Interstate 70. It was a place that smelled of old grease and floor cleaner, the kind of establishment where the vinyl seats were cracked and patched with duct tape. I had a ceramic mug of black coffee in front of me. Steam rose from it in a thin, wavering line. I stared at my hands, for the first time in 15 years. At 9 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, my hands were clean. There was no aluminum dust shimmering in my fingerprints. There was no grime under my nails. My cuticles were not stained black. They looked strange to me, like they belonged to a stranger or a mannequin, but my body was confused. My muscles were vibrating with a phantom ache. My back was stiff, bracing for the weight of steel that I was not lifting. My eyes were squinting against the glare of the morning sun coming through the window, anticipating the harsh blue flash of the welding arc. I was experiencing withdrawal, not from a substance, but from labor. I had turned my phone back on 10 minutes ago. I had placed it face up on the sticky Formica table, right next to the sugar dispenser. It was not a phone anymore. It was a Geiger counter, and the radiation levels were spiking. The first notification had come through at 7:10 in the morning. It was from Marla. "Client is here early. Where are you? The coffee maker in the office is broken again." I read it twice. The tone was fascinating. It was completely devoid of awareness. She had ignored the missing tools. She had ignored the note under the keys. To Marla, my absence was just a logistical hiccup, an annoyance like the broken coffee maker. In her mind, the hierarchy was so absolute that my resignation was simply not a possibility. She assumed I was running late, or perhaps out buying supplies for them. It was a command, not a question. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. I did not reply. At 7:40, the tone shifted. Frank began to call. The phone buzzed against the table, dancing slightly with the vibration. Dad calling. He called 4 times in a row. When he finally stopped, a voicemail popped up. I did not listen to it, but the transcription appeared on the screen a moment later. "Paisley, the Anderson order needs to be on the truck by noon. I do not see the cut list for the supports. Stop playing around and get in here. The driver is asking questions." He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask why I had left a note saying goodbye. He asked about the cut list. He was worried about the driver. I was a broken piece of equipment to him, a machine that had failed to start up at the beginning of the shift. He was not calling his daughter. He was calling maintenance. I watched a waitress pour coffee for a trucker 2 booths down. She looked tired. I wondered if she owned her own apron. I wondered if her boss knew her last name. At 8:15, Logan entered the chat. His message was short, typed with the arrogance of someone who had never faced a consequence he could not buy his way out of. "Stop being dramatic. We saw the note. Very funny. Come back and we will talk about your attitude. The shop is running fine without you. By the way, do not think you are essential. I almost laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound in my throat. The shop is running fine, of course. He thought that, at 8:15 in the morning, the shop runs on momentum. The machines turn on. The lights work. The existing inventory is there. The inertia of my 15 years of labor would carry them for a few hours, maybe even a day. Logan mistook that inertia for management. He mistook the ship floating for his ability to sail it. I signaled the waitress for a refill. Just keep it coming, I said. Rough morning? She asked, pouring the dark liquid. You have no idea, I replied. Or maybe you do. The best morning of my life. She looked at me, confused, then shrugged and walked away. By 9 o'clock, the tone on the screen changed from annoyance to panic. The inertia had run out. Reality had hit the fan. Marla texted again. Where are the drawings for the riverfront project? Logan cannot find the file. The riverfront foundry walkway. That was the big one. That was the contract that was supposed to pay off the line of credit they had secretly taken out. It was a massive, complex architectural steel job involving hundreds of feet of custom railing, spiraling ramps, and heavy structural supports. I knew exactly where the drawings were. They were on a secure solid-state drive in my pocket. But more importantly, the library of components needed to generate those drawings. The custom profiles, the bend calculations, the connection details, was gone from their system. Logan texted a minute later. What is the password for the cloud drive? The system says the directory is empty. Fix it, not please. Not, we have a problem, just fix it. I watched a fly crawl across the rim of the sugar dispenser. It was more organized than my family was right now. Then came the flood. Frank, the guys do not know the settings for the new pulsing unit. They are burning through the thin wall tubing. Pick up the phone. Logan, I cannot open the CAD assembly. It says reference files missing. What did you do? Marla, the inspector is here for the weld audit. He wants the procedure qualification records. They are not in the binder. Paisley, this is not a game. You are embarrassing us. I took a bite of dry toast. I was not embarrassing them. I was exposing them. The procedure qualification records were in the back of my truck, under a tarp. Those records were my intellectual property, signed by me, qualified by my test welds. They belonged to the welding engineer, and since Carter and Forge did not employ a welding engineer anymore, they did not have the records. At 10:30, the gaslighting began in earnest. The initial panic turned into a coordinated emotional assault. Marla sent a long paragraph. I cannot believe you are doing this to your family. After everything we have done for you, we gave you a job when nobody else would. We put a roof over your head. You are destroying this family out of spite. Your father is gripping his chest. He is under so much stress. If he has a heart attack, it is on your hands. I stared at the words. We gave you a job when nobody else would. That was a lie so bold it was almost impressive. I had graduated top of my class from the Technical Institute. I had offers from General Electric and Lockheed Martin. I stayed because Frank had begged me. I stayed because Marla had cried about keeping the legacy alive. And the heart attack card. Marla played the medical emergency card whenever she lost control of a situation. If the restaurant got her order wrong, she felt faint. If the bank called about an overdraft, Frank had chest pains. It was a script. I did not feel guilty. That was the surprise. I waited for the guilt to come, for that familiar heavy blanket of obligation to smother me. But it did not arrive. I just felt cold. I felt the clarity of a surgeon looking at a gangrenous limb. You do not feel bad about cutting it off. You know it is the only way to survive. Then came the threats. Logan, predictably, went legal. Logan, I just spoke to our lawyer. Taking company property is a felony. We know you took the tools and the laptop data. If you do not return them by noon, I am filing a police report for grand larceny and corporate espionage. I will have you arrested. Paisley, do not test me. I sipped my coffee. Grand larceny. The tools were purchased with my personal debit card. I had the receipts scanned and saved on my phone. The laptop data was my personal portfolio, created on my own time. The company property he was referring to was my brain, and unfortunately for Logan, slavery was illegal. He could not arrest me for taking my own skills with me. I looked at the screen one last time. The messages were stacking up, a vertical tower of desperation and malice. Frank, pick up. Marla. You are being selfish. Logan. I am calling the sheriff. Frank. The welder is making a weird noise. Marla. Please, honey, just tell us where the files are. I tapped the screen. I opened the contact for Mom. I scrolled down to the bottom. I pressed block caller. I opened Dad. Block caller. I opened Logan. Block caller. It felt like I was welding a pipe shut. With each tap, I was sealing a leak. I was stopping the flow of toxic sludge that had been poisoning my life for years. The phone went silent. The vibration stopped. The screen stayed dark. I sat there for another hour. The silence was loud. It was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a vacuum where there used to be noise. I paid my bill with cash. I left a $20 tip for the waitress. Have a good day, she said. I will. I said, and I meant it. I checked into a cheap motel 3 towns over. I did not want to be found, but I also did not have a destination yet. I needed to decompress. I needed to let the nitrogen bubbles out of my blood before I surfaced. For the next 48 hours, I did nothing. I lay on the lumpy mattress and stared at the ceiling. I watched bad cable television. I slept for 12 hours straight, woke up, ate a vending machine sandwich, and slept for another 10. My body was repairing itself. The constant state of cortisol-fueled fight or flight was fading. I did not turn my phone off, but I did not unlock it. I let it sit on the nightstand. I knew the blocked messages were piling up somewhere in the ether, but they could not reach me. I was in a bunker. On the morning of the 3rd day, I was packing my bag. I was ready to move on. I was going to head west, maybe towards the shipyards on the coast. I heard they were always hiring hull welders. My phone rang. It was a standard ringtone, not the specific alarms I had set for my family. I froze. My hand hovered over the device. It could be a creditor. It could be the police. If Logan was actually stupid enough to follow through, I picked it up. The name on the caller ID was not a family member. It was not a friend. It was Evan Klein, Riverfront Project Manager. My heart hammered against my ribs. Evan Klein, the man who held the contract that was keeping Carter and Forge alive. The man who demanded perfection and had no patience for excuses. If he was calling me, it meant the levees had broken. It meant the excuses Frank and Logan were spinning had failed. I took a deep breath. I swiped the green icon and held the phone to my ear. This is Paisley, I said. My voice was raspy from 2 days of silence. Paisley. Evan's voice was sharp, clipped, and dangerously calm. I am standing in the middle of your shop floor. I am looking at a piece of railing that looks like it was welded by a blindfolded child with a soldering iron. I closed my eyes. I knew exactly who had welded it. The new guy. Or maybe Frank tried to do it himself. I am sorry to hear that. Evan, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I asked for you. Evan continued. Your brother gave me a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation about restructuring and resource allocation. He told me you were on a sabbatical. Is that what he said? He also tried to tell me that the specs for the staircase stringers were over-engineered and that we could save money by using a thinner gauge steel. He tried to sell me garbage. Paisley. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Logan likes to save money. I do not care what Logan likes, Evan snapped. I care about my project. I care about the structural integrity of a walkway that will have 500 people standing on it next month. There was a pause. I could hear the background noise of the shop through the phone. I heard the high-pitched whine of a grinder. It sounded frantic. I am pulling the contract, Evan said. The words hung in the air. That was it. The death blow. Without the riverfront money, the bank would foreclose on the shop within 30 days. I understand, I said. No, you do not understand, Evan said. I am not just canceling the order. I am keeping the deadline. I have a ribbon-cutting ceremony in 6 weeks. I need this steel fabricated, and I need it done right. Evan, I do not work there anymore, I said. I cannot help you. I know you do not work there, he said. I figured that out the moment I saw your brother trying to read a blueprint upside down. His voice dropped an octave. It became very serious. I do not want the shop, Paisley. I never hired the building. I never hired the sign out front. I hired the welder who made the sample piece for the bid. I hired the person who caught the error in the architect's drawings last November. I gripped the phone tighter. I hired you, Evan said. So here's the deal. I am terminating the contract with Carter and Forge effectively immediately for breach of quality standards, and I am offering it to you. Me? I whispered. I do not have a shop. I have a pickup truck and a toolbox. Then get a shop, Evan said. Rent a garage. Find a barn. I do not care if you weld it in a parking lot. I will front you the material costs. I will pay the deposit directly to you. But I need to know right now. I stood up. The room seemed to tilt. This was insane. This was impossible. I need an answer. Paisley, Evan said. Are you a welder? Or were you just an employee? I looked at my face in the motel mirror. I looked at the clean hands. I looked at the determined eyes. I am a fabricator, I said. Good, Evan said. Be at the site in 2 hours to sign the new paperwork, and bring your hood. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. My hand was shaking. But this time, it was not from stress. It was from adrenaline. It was the feeling of the arc striking. The instant the circuit is completed and the power flows, I grabbed my bag. I grabbed my keys. I was not running away anymore. I was going to work, to understand why I walked away from $1 million contract and the only life I had ever known. You cannot just look at the deed I found in the trash. That was just the paperwork. The real severance happened 6 months earlier, in the plush, dimly lit dining room of the Oak and Anvil. It was a celebration dinner. The occasion was Logan receiving his Master of Business Administration degree. The Oak and Anvil was the kind of steakhouse where the menu did not list prices and the waiters scraped the crumbs off the tablecloth with a little silver blade between courses. It was the kind of place Frank loved because it made him feel like a titan of industry, even though I knew he would be sweating when the bill came. I remember the seating arrangement vividly. It was a round table, but somehow, Logan managed to sit at the head of it. He was wearing a navy blue suit that looked tailored, a stark contrast to Frank's off-the-rack blazer that pulled too tight across the shoulders. I was wearing a dress I had bought specifically for the night, feeling uncomfortable and exposed without my work boots. Marla tapped her spoon against her wine glass. The sharp, crystal ring silenced the table. To Logan, she beamed, her eyes shimmering with tears that looked practiced. Our visionary, you have worked so hard. Sweetheart, the family is so proud. To Logan, Frank echoed, raising his glass of bourbon. To the future of Carter and Forge, I raised my water glass. Congratulations, I said. I meant it. Mostly. I thought an MBA might actually help us organize the back office. I was naive. Logan took a sip of his wine, a Pinot Noir he had selected after sending the first bottle back because it needed to breathe more, and leaned back. He did not look like a son having dinner with his parents. He looked like a CEO holding a board meeting with difficult shareholders. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad, Logan said, his voice smooth and projected, as if he were addressing a lecture hall. But honestly, the degree is just a tool. The real work starts now. I have been looking at our operational efficiency, and frankly, it is terrifying. We are bleeding money. I frowned. We are profitable, Logan. I checked the margins on the last 3 jobs. We are at 20%. Logan waved his hand dismissively, a gesture he must have learned in a seminar on power dynamics. 20% is a hobby. Paisley, it is not a business. We should be at 40. The problem is your methodology. It is archaic. Archaic? I asked. I use state-of-the-art pulsed MIG welders. We have a 5-axis plasma cutter. I am not talking about the machines, Logan said, cutting into his filet mignon. I am talking about the philosophy. You are obsessed with this craftsmanship idea. It is romantic, sure, but it does not scale. I was talking to my professor about our workflow, and he agrees. We need to pivot to automation and outsourcing. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. Outsourcing? We are a custom fabrication shop. We build things that do not exist until we draw them. That is the problem, Logan said, pointing his fork at me. Custom is a trap. We spend too much time on design and quality assurance. Why are we doing dye-penetrant testing on every single structural weld? It is overkill. It consumes man-hours. If we just spot-checked 10% of the output, we could double our throughput. I stared at him. We test every weld because if a balcony collapses, people die. Logan. That is not overhead. That is liability insurance. Frank cleared his throat. I expected him to back me up. Frank knew the code books. He knew the regulations. Now, Paisley, Frank said, his voice conciliatory but firm. Hear your brother out. He has learned the modern ways. The industry is changing. Exactly, Logan said, emboldened. You are thinking like a tradesman. Paisley, you need to think like an executive. Why are we buying domestic steel? I found a supplier in Southeast Asia that can ship us carbon steel for 30% less. Sure, the alloy composition varies a little, but who is going to know? Once it is painted, metal is metal. Metal is not just metal, I snapped, my voice rising slightly. If the carbon content is too high, it becomes brittle. If it is too low, it is soft. You cannot just swap materials to save 3 cents a pound. Logan sighed, looking at Marla with a see what I have to deal with expression. See? This is the resistance to innovation I was talking about. We are leaving money on the table because we are afraid to disrupt the status quo. Marla reached over and patted Logan's hand. It is amazing how you understand these things. Logan, your mind just works so fast. I looked from Marla to Frank. They were nodding. They were actually nodding. I realized then what was happening. They did not understand a word he was saying. They did not know what throughput or variable alloy composition meant, but they understood his tone. Logan sounded confident. He used big words. He wore a nice suit. In their minds, confidence equaled competence. It is a psychological phenomenon I had read about. The Dunning-Kruger effect, or perhaps something even simpler. When you do not know a trade, you judge the expert by how well they sell themselves, not by how well they do the work. I was the quiet one in the welding mask, covered in soot. Logan was the shiny one with the vocabulary. Therefore, to them, Logan must be the smarter one. I have a plan, Logan continued, warming up to his audience. We standardize our product line. We stop taking these weird, one-off artistic jobs. We focus on mass-producing generic railing sections. We can open a second location in 2 years, maybe franchise the brand. Carter and Forge could be in every hardware store in the Midwest. Franchise? I asked, incredulous. We are a metal shop, not a burger joint. You cannot franchise custom fabrication. Not with that attitude, Logan smirked. I am thinking big picture, Paisley, expansion, leverage, synergy. He had never held a welding torch for more than 5 minutes without complaining about the heat. He had never felt the physical toll of grinding overhead for 8 hours. Yet here he was, planning to expand a labor he could not perform. I looked at Frank again. Dad, you know this is impossible. We do not have the capital to mass produce. And we would lose our reputation. Our clients hire us because we are better, not because we are cheap. Frank put his fork down. He looked tired, but there was a strange hardness in his eyes. Paisley, he said, and the way he said my name felt like a door closing. You are excellent at what you do. You are the best welder I have ever seen, better than I ever was. I waited for the but, he continued. You get lost in the details. You care too much about the bead and not enough about the bank account. Logan. Logan sees the horizon. He has the vision. I am the one keeping the lights on, I whispered. And we appreciate that. Marla interjected quickly. We really do. But Logan is ready to lead. We need to let him steer the ship. Then Frank said the sentence that I should have tattooed on my forehead as a warning label. Con, he said, using his pet name for me. You do the best at the hard part. Let Logan handle the big part. The hard part. The physical part. The dirty part. The part that broke your body and burned your skin. That was my domain. The big part. The talking part. The money part. The credit. That was Logan's. I sat back in my chair. The steak in front of me looked like gray rubber. I felt small. I felt like the mechanic in the pit crew while the driver sprayed champagne on the podium. Just then, a man walked by our table. It was Mr. Henderson, the owner of the local car dealership chain. He was a big client. I had just finished fabricating a massive, stainless steel archway for his new showroom entrance. It had taken me 3 weeks of late nights. The welding had to be mirror polished so it looked like a single piece of liquid mercury. Frank! Marla! Mr. Henderson boomed, shaking Frank's hand. Good to see you. Hello? Bill? Frank beamed. You know the family? I sure do, Mr. Henderson said. He looked at Logan. And this must be the young genius behind that archway. Logan, right? My heart stopped. I waited. I waited for Frank to correct him. I waited for Marla to say, Actually, that was Paisley. She designed it and built it. Logan stood up and shook Mr. Henderson's hand firmly. Good to see you. Bill, I am glad you like the installation. We wanted to make sure it reflected the modern aesthetic of your brand. It is spectacular, Mr. Henderson said. The seamless finish is incredible. You have got a real talent, son. Thank you, Logan said. We aim for perfection. I looked at Marla. She was smiling. She was glowing. She looked at Mr. Henderson and said, Logan has really taken the reins on our special projects. He is so talented. I sat there, frozen. I was invisible. I was not even a person anymore. I was a ghost machine that produced results for them to claim. They did not just lie to the client. They lied right in front of me, and they expected me to swallow it. They expected me to smile and nod, because that was my role. I was the secret ingredient they refused to list on the label. Mr. Henderson left. Logan sat back down, looking pleased with himself. See? Logan said to me, unbuttoning his jacket. Client relations. That is what matters. He feels good about the project because I made him feel good about it. He feels good about it because the archway did not fall on his head, I said, my voice flat. Details, Logan waved. Semantics? I looked around the table. Frank was finishing his bourbon. Marla was checking her makeup in a compact mirror. Logan was texting someone, probably bragging about the dinner bill he was about to put on the company credit card. At the time, I thought I was just angry. I thought I was just feeling unappreciated, but looking back now, with the deed in my pocket and the highway stretching out in front of me, I realized that dinner was not a celebration of a degree. It was a reveal party. They were not celebrating his potential. They were celebrating their relief. They had already transferred the shop to him 3 years prior. They had been waiting for him to get this piece of paper so they could justify the theft they had already committed. They were not mesmerized by his confidence because they were stupid. They were mesmerized because they were desperate. They needed his lies to be true. They needed him to be the savior because they had already bet my inheritance on him. I was not the daughter. I was the employee they had forgot to fire. You okay, Paisley? Frank asked, noticing I had not touched my food. You look a little pale. I am fine, I had lied. Just tired from the shift. Well, Logan said, raising his glass again. Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. I have some ideas for restructuring the shop floor layout that I want to run by you. I cannot wait, I said, and I drank my water, swallowing the truth down deep where it would simmer for 6 months until it exploded. The conversation with Evan Klein was not a negotiation. It was an autopsy of my family's competence, performed live over a cellular network. I need you to understand exactly what happened this morning. Paisley, Evan said. His voice was terrifyingly level. It was the voice of a man who managed a $40 million infrastructure budget and had zero tolerance for structural failure. I walked into Carter and Forge at 8 o'clock. I wanted to see the mock-up for the spiral ramp sections. Do you know what your brother showed me? I gripped the steering wheel of my truck, parked on the shoulder of a gravel road. I can guess, I said. He showed you a rendering. He showed me a slideshow, Evan corrected. He had a projector set up in the conference room. He had charts showing projected cost savings. He spent 15 minutes talking about value engineering the material costs. I closed my eyes. Value engineering. That was Logan's favorite euphemism for buying garbage. He proposed swapping the specified 316 marine-grade stainless steel for 304. Evan continued. For a walkway that sits 20 feet from a river, in Ohio, where we salt the roads 6 months out of the year. He does not know the difference, I said. To him, it is just shiny metal. Then he told me that the ultrasonic testing for the support columns was redundant, Evan said. He said, and I'm quoting him directly here, modern welding technology is so consistent that individual inspection is just a legacy cost. He called safety inspections a legacy cost. Paisley. I felt a phantom pain in my stomach. That was not just ignorance, that was negligence. If those columns failed, the walkway would collapse. People would die. Logan was not just risking the business, he was risking lives to save a few percentage points on the margin. I asked him to pull up the shop drawings so I could show him the stress points, Evan said. He could not find them. He fumbled around with a laptop for 10 minutes and then tried to show me a PDF on his phone. He could not read the weld symbols. Paisley. He looked at a fillet weld symbol and asked if it was a typo. I am sorry, Evan, I said. I really am. Do not apologize for him, Evan snapped. He is a suit. The world is full of suits who think they can manage trades they do not understand. But I do not hire suits. I hire fabricators. The line went silent for a moment. I could hear the wind buffeting my truck. I walked out, Evan said. I told him the contract was under review. I told him he was in breach of the technical competency clause. You should have seen his face. He looked like I had just slapped him. He started stammering about his MBA and his strategic vision. He will try to sue you, I warned. He loves threatening legal action. Let him try. My lawyers eat people like Logan for breakfast, Evan said dismissively, but that leaves me with a problem. I have a mayor who wants a ribbon cutting in October. I have steel that needs to be cut. And the only person in this state who understands the complex geometry of that spiral ramp is currently sitting in a truck on the side of the road. I do not have a shop, Evan, I repeated. I cannot build a 200-foot walkway in a motel parking lot. Then find a space, Evan commanded. I am not asking you to build a factory. I am asking you to rent a roof and 4 walls with a high-voltage hookup. I will front the materials. I will pay the deposit on the lease. I will write you a check today for $50,000 as a mobilization advance. $50,000. My breath caught in my throat. That was more than I made in a year at Carter and Forge. Why? I asked. Why are you doing this? You could go to a big fabrication house in Cleveland. They have robots. They have engineers. Because the big houses are slow, Evan said. And because I saw you fix that railing at the library last year, you did it in the rain. You did it without complaining. You ground the weld flush so perfectly I could not feel the seam with my fingernail. I trust your hands. Paisley. I do not trust a corporation. I trust the person who actually holds the torch. He paused, and his voice softened just a fraction. I am not hiring the sign out front. Paisley, I am hiring you, but I need an answer. If you say no, I call Cleveland, and your family loses the contract anyway. If you say yes, you save my timeline, and you build something that is actually yours. I looked out the windshield. I saw a hawk circling over a field of dead corn. It was hunting. It was alone, but it was free. "Give me 2 hours," I said. "1 hour," Evan countered. "I will email you the revised contract. Send me an address where I can ship the steel." He hung up. I did not hesitate. I put the truck in gear and spun the tires in the gravel. I knew this town. I knew the skeletons of industry that littered the outskirts of Ashford Ridge. I knew every failed mechanic shop, every abandoned warehouse, every foreclosure that had been sitting on the market for a decade. I drove to the south side, past the old textile mill that had burned down in the 90s. There was a stretch of road called Cinder Lane. It was a graveyard of small businesses. I pulled up to a structure that looked like a bruised knuckle. It was a cinder block garage with a flat tar roof and a rusty rolling steel door. It used to be a transmission repair shop, then a storage unit for a landscaping company, and now it was just a "for lease" sign fading in the sun. I called the number on the sign. A man answered on the second ring. He sounded asleep. "I am standing in front of property 412 Cinder Lane," I said. "I want to rent it." "It is $1,200 a month," the man grunted. "First and last up front, cash or certified check." "I will give you 3 months in cash right now if you bring the keys in 15 minutes, I said. "I am on my way," he said. Suddenly awake, while I waited, I walked around the perimeter. The building was ugly. The paint was peeling in long, scab-like strips. Weeds were growing through the cracks in the asphalt driveway, some of them waist-high. The security fence was leaning at a drunken angle, but I looked closer. The electrical service drop was heavy-duty, 3-phase power. I could see the transformer on the pole. That meant I could run a heavy industrial welder without blowing the grid. The loading door was 12 feet high, tall enough to back a flatbed truck inside. The landlord arrived in a beat-up sedan. He was a short man with a cigar chewed down to a nub. He looked at me, then at my truck, then at the cash I had withdrawn from the bank on my way over. My entire life savings, minus enough for gas and food. "You plan on growing weed in there?" he asked, eyeing the cash. "I plan on melting steel," I said. "Open it up." He wrestled with the padlock for a moment, cursing under his breath, then hauled the chain away. He threw the rolling door up. It shrieked. It was the sound of metal grinding on metal. A scream of neglect. Sunlight flooded the interior. It was empty. The floor was concrete, stained with decades of oil and transmission fluid, creating a dark, abstract map of labor. There was a pit in the center for working under cars, covered by rotting plywood. The air smelled of old rubber and damp dust. It was perfect. "Does the power work?" I asked. He walked to the breaker panel and flipped the main switch. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, buzzed, and then hummed to life. One of them was strobing like a disco light, but there was light. "Water works too," he said. "Toilet is in the back. Do not flush paper towels." "I will take it," I said. We signed the lease on the hood of his car. No credit check, no background check, just cash on the barrelhead. He gave me a single brass key that looked like it could open a dungeon. "Good luck, lady," he said, counting the bills. "Most people do not last 6 months out here." "I am not most people," I said. He drove off. I was alone. I stood in the center of the garage. It was cold. It was dirty. It was nothing like the organized, heated, ventilated facility at Carter and Forge. But it was mine. I walked to my truck and dropped the tailgate. I began to unload. I dragged my heavy welding table into the center of the room. I set up my tool chest against the wall. I ran my extension cords. I worked with a feverish intensity. I was not just setting up a shop. I was building a fortress. By 4 in the afternoon, I had a functional workspace. It was primitive, but it was operational. I texted Evan a photo of the open garage door with my welding hood sitting on the table. "Send the steel. Address is 412 Cinder Lane." He replied instantly. "Trucks arrive tomorrow at 8 a.m. Contract sent to your email. Sign it." I opened the email on my phone. I scrolled through the legalese until I found the signature line. Contractor. Red Ember Fabrication. I had made the name up on the spot when I filed for the LLC online an hour ago. Red Ember. It sounded like something that refused to go out. something that stayed hot even when buried under ash. I signed digitally. I looked at the empty shop. I needed to test the power. I needed to make sure the breakers would hold. I grabbed a piece of scrap angle iron I had found in the corner. I clamped it to my table. I hooked up my portable stick welder, the backup machine I kept in my truck. I plugged it into the heavy outlet. I heard the cooling fan kick on. It was a steady, reassuring drone. I put on my welding jacket. It still smelled like the old shop, like my father's cologne and the specific cutting fluid we used there. I buttoned it up to the neck. I pulled on my gloves. I picked up the stinger holder and clamped a fresh E7018 rod into its jaws. I lowered my hood. The dark glass blocked out the cracked walls, the oil stains, the weeds outside. It blocked out Logan's arrogance and Frank's betrayal. It blocked out the fear that was gnawing at the edge of my mind. I leaned in. I struck the arc. Crack hiss! The sound was instantaneous and violent. A brilliant white light exploded at the tip of the rod, blindingly bright even through the filter. The air instantly filled with the sharp scent of burning flux and ozone. I dragged the rod across the steel. The molten puddle formed, liquid and obedient. I watched the metal flow. I controlled the heat. I controlled the penetration. The sound of welding is distinctive. A good weld sounds like bacon frying, a consistent, aggressive sizzle. But this time, it sounded different. At Carter and Forge, the sound of the arc was the sound of obligation. It was the sound of paying bills, of meeting deadlines, of keeping my parents comfortable. It was the sound of servitude. Here, in this cold, dirty garage on Cinder Lane, the sound was raw. It bounced off the concrete block walls and echoed back to me. It sounded like a declaration. I ran the bead for 6 inches, then snapped the rod away to break the arc. The silence rushed back in, but the smell remained, the smell of hot steel. I flipped my hood up and looked at the weld. It was straight. It was strong. It was cooling from a bright cherry red to a dull gray. I touched the table, feeling the warmth radiating through the metal. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "We are open for business." My phone buzzed again. I expected Evan. It was a notification from my bank app. Deposit received. $50,000. Riverfront project mobilization. I stared at the number. It was real. Then, another notification. A text from a number I had blocked. But my carrier sometimes let voicemails slip through as notifications. Voicemail from Dad. I did not listen to it. I did not even read the transcription. I swiped left and hit delete. I had work to do. The steel was coming in the morning, and for the first time in my life, every spark that flew, every bead I laid, and every dollar I earned belonged to me. The first 72 hours of red ember fabrication were not spent welding. They were spent drowning in paper. I had $50,000 in the bank, a rented garage that smelled like transmission fluid, and a terrified realization that being a business owner meant being a lawyer, an accountant, and a safety officer all at once. I slept 3 hours a night, curled up on a camping cot I had shoved into the corner of the office, covered by my heavy welding jacket. I had to register the LLC. I had to get a federal tax ID number. I had to buy general liability insurance because Evan's contract required a $2 million policy minimum. I had to write a safety manual from scratch because I could not use the one I wrote for Carter and Forge without risking a copyright lawsuit from my own brother. So I sat there at a folding card table under the buzzing fluorescent light, typing furiously on a laptop I had bought at a pawn shop. I wrote about fire suppression protocols. I wrote about respiratory protection standards. I wrote about hazardous material handling. I was building the skeleton of a company out of thin air, but there was a nagging fear in the back of my mind. It was a cold, slippery feeling that I could not shake. It was the fear that my family was not done with me. Logan's text about corporate espionage and grand larceny had been bluster. But bluster can still turn into a lawsuit if the person screaming it has enough money to hire a board attorney. I needed armor. On the 4th day, I called Tessa Monroe. Tessa and I had gone to high school together in Ashford Ridge. She was the girl who sat in the front row of AP History and argued with the teacher about the nuances of the Constitution. She had gone to law school in Chicago, worked for a big corporate firm for 5 years, burned out, and moved back to Ohio to open her own practice specializing in commercial law and contracts. She agreed to meet me at my shop. When she pulled up in her sensible sedan, she stepped out wearing a sharp gray blazer and jeans. She looked at the peeling paint of the garage, the weeds, and the rusted rolling door. "It has character," she said, adjusting her glasses. "It has 3-phase power and a cheap lease," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Come in. The coffee is terrible." We sat at the card table. I handed her the contract from Evan. "Review this," I said. "Make sure I am not signing my soul away. And then, I need you to check something else. Something personal." Tessa read the riverfront contract in silence. She was fast. Her eyes scanned the pages, stopping only to tap a finger on a clause here or there. "The indemnity clause is standard," she murmured. "Payment terms are aggressive. Net 30? That is good. Intellectual property rights remain with the creator until final payment. Good. This is a solid contract. Paisley, Evan Klein wants you to work, not to trap you." "Good," I exhaled. "Now for the other thing." I took a breath. "I need you to look into Carter and Forge. I need to know if I have any trailing liability. I was never an owner, just an employee. But my name is on a lot of documents, and I need to know if they can actually sue me for the tools I took." Tessa looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Did you buy the tools?" "Yes, personal funds." "Do you have receipts?" "Digital copies of bank statements." "Then let them sue," Tessa said with a small, sharp smile. "I would love to depose Logan. I would make him cry in 10 minutes. But let us look at the bigger picture. If you are worried about liability, I need to run a search on the company. Public records, UCC filings, liens. Let us see how healthy the beast actually is." She opened her laptop and tethered it to her phone's hotspot. "Give me a minute," she said. I waited. The shop was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I watched Tessa's face. I saw the exact moment she found something. Her eyebrows knit together. She leaned closer to the screen. She scrolled down, then scrolled back up. She clicked a link, waited, and clicked another. The silence stretched out. It became heavy. "Paisley," she said. Her voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of a friend. It was the voice of a lawyer who had just found a smoking gun. "Come look at this." I walked around the table and looked at her screen. It was a database of state commercial filings. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "This is a UCC-1 financing statement," Tessa explained. "It is a public notice that a creditor has an interest in the personal property of a debtor. Basically, it is what the bank files when you take out a secured business loan." She pointed to a line dated 6 months ago. "Debtor, Carter and Forge Metalworks, LLC, secured party, Apex Growth Capital, collateral, all inventory, equipment, accounts receivable, and general intangibles, now owned or hereafter acquired." "Okay," I said, trying to parse the legalese. "They took out a loan. Businesses take out loans." "Look at the amount. Paisley," Tessa whispered. "And look at the second filing below it." I looked. There was a second entry, filed the same day, a mortgage lien, collateral, real property located at 1500 Industrial Way. That was the shop address, the land, the building. "They mortgaged the shop," I said, feeling a cold numbness spread through my chest. "Frank always said the building was free and clear. He paid it off in 1998. It was free and clear," Tessa said. "Until 6 months ago, they leveraged everything, the building, the machines, the metal on the racks, based on the lien value. They borrowed $750,000. I grabbed the back of her chair. $750,000? For what? We did not buy any new machines. We did not expand. We did not hire anyone." "That is the question," Tessa said. She started typing in a new tab. "Apex Growth Capital. Who are they?" She navigated to a financial news site. "Here we go," she said. "Apex Growth Capital. They are a high-risk private lender. They specialize in bridge loans for companies that cannot get traditional bank financing. Interest rates usually sit around 18 to 24%. 24%? I choked. That is loan shark territory. It is predatory, Tessa corrected, but legal. Why would your father need $750,000 at 24% interest? I thought back to the dinner, the MBA dinner, Logan talking about modernization and investing in the future. Logan, I said, he must have convinced them to invest it. He was talking about scaling. He was talking about outsourcing. Tessa dug deeper. She found a press release from a defunct tech startup called Virtue Scale Logistics. Does this ring a bell? Tessa asked. I read the screen. Virtue Scale Logistics halts operations following SEC investigation into alleged Ponzi scheme structure. No, I said. What is this? I am looking at a creditor list from the bankruptcy filing of this tech company, Tessa said, scrolling through a PDF document. It is a long list of investors who lost their money. She stopped scrolling. She pointed. There, on page 42, was a name. Carter and Forge Metalworks, LLC. They put the money into this, Tessa said, her voice flat. They borrowed $750,000 against the family business and dumped it into a logistics optimization startup that turned out to be a scam. I sat down heavily on a milk crate I used as a stool. The room was spinning. It all made sense. The sudden pressure to cut costs, the frantic need for the riverfront contract, the way Frank looked so old and tired, the way Marla was obsessed with appearances. They were not just struggling, they were drowning. The money is gone, I whispered. It evaporated. It gets worse, Tessa said. If this loan is at 24%, the monthly interest payment alone is roughly $15,000. That is before they even touch the principal. We do not make that much in net profit a month, I said. Not consistently. Exactly, Tessa said. That is why they are panicking. That is why they need the riverfront money. They are using the operating revenue of the shop to service the debt on a bad gamble. They are robbing Peter to pay Paul. But Paul is a loan shark with a lien on the building. I stared at the concrete floor. If I had stayed, if I had not found that deed, I would be working 18 hours a day, destroying my body, stressing over every weld, solely to pay the interest on a loan my brother took out to play venture capitalist. I would have been the engine on a sinking ship, running at full throttle just to keep the water from reaching the bridge. They are insolvent, I said. Technically, they are walking dead, Tessa agreed. One missed payment, one canceled contract, and Apex seizes the assets. They take the building, they take the machines, they take everything. And since the riverfront contract just got canceled, I let the sentence hang. The clock just accelerated, Tessa said. She looked at me with genuine sympathy. You got out just in time. Paisley. If you were still there when the walls came down, and if you were listed as an officer or a manager, which they might have tried to do to pin liability on you, you could have been dragged into the bankruptcy proceedings. I was not an officer, I said. I was just labor. Are you sure? Tessa asked. Because I found one more thing. She switched tabs again. This is a bid portal for the State Public Works Department, she said. Public records again. I looked up the bid package for the Riverfront project, the one Carter and Forge won originally. I did the sample welds for that, I said. I remember. Look at the key personnel section, Tessa said. I leaned in. Project executive, Logan Hughes, MBA, technical director / lead quality control, Paisley Hughes, certified welding inspector, AWS, DM.1 specialist. I froze. I never agreed to be technical director, I said. I do not have that title. I was never paid for that title. It gets better, Tessa said. Look at the resume attached. She clicked a link. A PDF opened. It was my resume, but it was not the resume I had on my laptop. It was doctored. It listed me as partner at Carter and Forge. It claimed I had management oversight of all safety protocols. It claimed I had 20 years of experience, which would mean I started welding when I was 14, which was true, but not legally claimable for a state contract. They used me, I said. The anger that rose up in me was different from before. It was about betrayal of family. This was professional identity theft. They needed your credentials to qualify for the bid, Tessa explained. Logan has an MBA, but the state requires a technical lead with specific certifications for a structural steel project. Logan does not have them. You do. So they slapped your name on the paperwork, gave you a fake promotion on paper to impress the state, and never told you. If that walkway had failed, I started. If that walkway had failed, Tessa finished, the state would have looked at this document. They would have seen you listed as the technical director and quality control lead. They would have come after your license. They would have blamed you for the negligence. I stood up. I walked to the open garage door. I looked out at the weeds and the broken asphalt. I felt sick. They had not just stolen my past labor. They had mortgaged my future reputation. They had set me up to be the fall guy for a disaster they were actively engineering with their cheap materials and lack of inspection. They were going to let me build a bomb, and they had already signed my name to the detonator. Can I sue them? I asked, not turning around. For the misuse of your credentials? Absolutely, Tessa said. For fraud? Yes, but Paisley, you cannot squeeze blood from a stone. They are broke. If you sue them now, you are just getting in line behind the bank and the private equity sharks. I turned back to face her. I do not want their money. I said, I want my name off their books. I want a paper trail proving I had nothing to do with their fraud. That we can do, Tessa said. I will draft a cease and desist letter immediately. We will send a formal notification to the State Works Department stating that you are no longer affiliated with Carter and Forge and that any use of your credentials is unauthorized. We will nuke their ability to use you as a shield. Do it, I said. Send it today. Tessa nodded and started typing. I walked back to my welding table. I ran my hand over the cold steel of the surface. For days, I had felt a lingering sense of guilt. I had felt like I abandoned my aging parents. I had felt like the villain in a family drama, the ungrateful daughter who ran away when things got tough. That guilt vanished. It turned to ash and blew away. I had not abandoned them. I had escaped a hostage situation. I looked at the pile of steel that had been delivered that morning. It was raw, honest material. It did not lie. It did not have hidden debts. It did not fake its credentials. If you treated it right, it held. If you treated it wrong, it broke. I picked up my grinder. Tessa, I said. She looked up. Add a line to that letter, I said. Tell them that if they contact me again, for any reason other than a legal summons, I will file a report for identity theft with the Attorney General. Scorched earth, Tessa noted. I like it. They burned the bridge, I said, plugging in the grinder. I am just making sure the fire does not cross the river to my side. I pulled my safety glasses down. I pressed the trigger. The grinder screamed to life, a high-pitched wail that drowned out the silence, the doubt, and the last remnants of my pity for the people who had raised me. I had a deadline to meet, and this time, the profit was mine. November in Ohio brings a specific kind of cold. It is a damp, bone-eating chill that seeps through concrete floors and settles into your joints. My new shop on Cinder Lane did not have central heating. It had a single industrial space heater that rattled like a dying tractor and smelled of kerosene. But to me, it smelled like freedom. I was working on the second spiral section for the riverfront project. The steel was clamped down, the geometry was perfect, and the arc of my welder was singing that crisp, frying bacon sound that tells you everything is right in the world. Then I heard the gravel crunch. It was not the heavy rumble of a delivery truck. It was the tentative, rolling creep of a sedan tires on loose stone. I did not stop welding immediately. I finished the pass, letting the puddle fill the crater at the end of the joint, and held the torch in place for the post-flow gas to cool the tungsten. Only then did I flip my hood up. My father was standing in the open garage door. Frank looked like he had aged 10 years in the 10 days since I had left. His shoulders, usually pulled back in a posture of performative authority, were slumped. His jacket, a beige windbreaker he had worn since I was in high school, looked too big for him, as if he was shrinking inside it. He did not look at me, not at first. He looked at the steel. His eyes scanned the massive, curved section of railing I had just fabricated. He looked at the bright, clean welds. He looked at the complex jig I had built from scrap to hold the tolerance. He was not looking at his daughter. He was looking at a production line. He was looking at the machine that used to print money for him, now sitting in a dirty garage, printing money for itself. "You are using the pulse setting," Frank said. His voice was rough, like he had been shouting or coughing for days. "It minimizes heat input," I said, setting my torch down. "Less distortion on the curve." "Smart," he muttered. Logan could not figure out why the test pieces were warping. "I know," I said. I did not offer him coffee. I did not offer him a chair. I stood behind my welding table, using it as a steel barricade between my past and my present. Frank finally looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. "It is cold in here, Paisley." "I wear layers," I replied. He took a few steps inside, kicking a loose piece of gravel across the floor. "The shop is quiet, too quiet. The boys, they are confused. They miss having someone who knows how to set the machines." "They will figure it out," I said. "Or they will read the manuals I left." "They cannot read the manuals," Frank snapped, a flash of his old impatience surfacing. "Because half of them are in your handwriting, and the other half are too technical. Logan hired a new foreman, a guy from Cleveland. He quit after 2 days, said the workflow made no sense." I crossed my arms. "Logan designed the workflow. It is optimized." Frank winced at the word. He rubbed his face with a hand that shook slightly. "Look, Con, we need to stop this silent treatment, this rebellion. It has gone on long enough." "I am not rebelling, Frank," I said, using his first name. It felt strange in my mouth, but necessary. "I am working. I have a deadline." "So do we," Frank exploded, his voice echoing off the cinder blocks. "The bank is calling the house 3 times a day. The steel suppliers put us on a cash-on-delivery basis because of a missed invoice. Marla is a wreck. She has not slept a full night since you cleared out your desk." He walked closer to the table. He placed his hands on the edge of the steel plate, leaning in like he was about to share a conspiracy. "I am here to make you an offer," Frank said. His tone shifted. He tried to summon the benevolent patriarch voice, the one he used when he gave me a $50 Christmas bonus after a year of record profits. "We want you back, not just as a welder. I talked to Logan. We are willing to make you shop manager. You run the floor. You handle the crews. You handle the QA. Logan stays in the office and handles the business side." I stared at him. "Shop manager. That is the job I was already doing. Dad, you just never gave me the title or the pay." "We will fix the pay," Frank said quickly. "And we are prepared to offer you equity, 10%. He said it with a pause, waiting for me to gasp, waiting for me to fall to my knees in gratitude. 10%, I repeated. 10% of Carter and Forge. Frank said, "You will be a partner, a real partner. It is what you always wanted, right? To be part of the legacy?" I looked around my garage. I looked at the weeds growing through the cracks near the door. Then I looked back at him. 10% of what, exactly? I asked quietly. Frank blinked. "Of the company, of the assets. 10% of a zero is still zero. Frank," I said. "Actually, in your case, it is 10% of a negative number." "What are you talking about?" Frank straightened up, feigning offense. "We have assets. We have the building. We have the land." "You have a mortgage," I said, "and you have a second lien." Frank's face went pale. It was not a gradual change. It was like the blood was drained out of him with a syringe. "I know about Apex Growth Capital," I said. My voice was steady, cold, and precise. I know you borrowed $750,000 6 months ago. I know you leveraged the building, the machines, and the inventory. I know the interest rate is 24%, and I know the money is gone because Logan dumped it into a Ponzi scheme disguised as a logistics startup. Frank opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish on a dock. So, I continued, you are offering me 10% of a debt. You want me to come back, work 80 hours a week, and use my sweat to pay off a loan shark so that Logan does not have to admit he lost the family fortune. That is not an offer. Dad, that is a trap. Frank gripped the table. His knuckles were white. Who told you? Public records, I said. It is amazing what you can find when you actually read the paperwork, something Logan never does. Frank's defiance crumbled. He slumped against the table, the weight of the secret finally crushing him now that it was out. We thought it was a sure thing, he whispered. Logan said the return on investment would be 200% in a year. We were going to pay off the mortgage. We were going to buy new machines. We were going to retire. You gambled, I said, and you lost, and now you want me to cover the bet. We are family, Frank shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The sudden noise made the welding leads vibrate. Does that mean nothing to you? Your grandfather built that shop with a hammer and a hacksaw. He left it to me to protect. If we default, they take it all. Paisley, they take the anvil. They take the sign. They take the history. Then you should have protected it, I said. You should have protected it from your son. Logan made a mistake, Frank pleaded. He is young. He was trying to help. But you are abandoning us. You are the strong one. You have always been the strong one. Your mother is sick with worry. She feels the stress in her chest. Do you want that on your conscience? That you let the family legacy die because you were too proud to help? He was playing the hits, the legacy, the sick mother, the guilt. It was a symphony of manipulation that had worked on me for 15 years. But the frequency was wrong. I was not tuned to it anymore. I am not the heir, Frank, I said. I never was. You made that clear when you signed the deed over to Logan 3 years ago. I was just the load-bearing wall. I was the structure you used to keep the roof up while you renovated the penthouse for him. That is not true, Frank stammered. It is exactly true, I said. You used me to keep the business viable so you could hand a healthy company to your son. Well, the wall is gone. The roof is coming down. That is gravity. It is not my fault. Frank stared at me with a mix of horror and hatred. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the dynamic had inverted. He needed me, and I did not need him. I did not even want his approval anymore. I have work to do, I said, reaching for my helmet. I have a delivery for Evan Klein on Friday. You remember Evan, the client you lost? Frank recoiled, as if I had slapped him. He pushed himself off the table. He adjusted his windbreaker with trembling hands. You are cold, Paisley, he spat. You have metal in your heart. Better than having nothing in my head, I replied. He turned and walked out. He did not look back. I listened to the crunch of the tires as he backed out of the driveway. He drove fast, kicking up dust, running away from the truth I had just forced him to look at. I watched the dust settle. I felt a strange vibration in my hands. It was adrenaline, but it was also relief. The umbilical cord was cut. I went back to work. I welded until my arms ached. I welded until the sun went down and the garage turned into a cave of shadows, lit only by the harsh blue flash of the arc. At 7 o'clock, I turned off the machine. The silence rushed back in. I sat on a milk crate and ate a sandwich I had bought from a gas station. The bread was stale, but I was starving. A set of headlights swept across the front of the garage. I stiffened. If Frank had come back with Marla, I was going to lock the door and call the police. But it was not a sedan. It was a courier van. A young man in a uniform hopped out, holding a flat cardboard envelope. Delivery for Red Ember Fabrication, he called out, looking at the number on the garage door. Are you Paisley Hughes? That is me, I said, walking out to meet him. I signed the digital pad. He handed me the envelope and drove off. It was a priority mail envelope from a law firm in Columbus. Sterling, Holt, and Associates. I tore the tab open, standing under the single exterior floodlight. It was a cease and desist letter, but it was not just a warning, it was a declaration of war. Dear Miss Hughes, we represent Carter and Forge Metalworks, LLC. It has come to our attention that you are currently operating a competing business utilizing proprietary trade secrets, confidential client lists, and intellectual property belonging to our client. Furthermore, our client asserts that the designs, fabrication techniques, and custom tooling you are currently utilizing were developed during your employment at Carter and Forge, and thus remain the sole property of the company under the work-for-hire doctrine. We demand the immediate return of all digital assets, physical prototypes, and the surrender of all current contracts obtained using said proprietary information, including but not limited to the Riverfront Foundry project. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in a lawsuit seeking damages in excess of $2 million. I read the letter twice. Logan. This was Logan's move. Frank had gone home, told Logan I refused the 10%, and probably mentioned that I was building the Riverfront job. Logan's reaction was not to fix his shop. It was to try to burn mine down. He was claiming he owned my skills. He was claiming that because I learned to weld under his roof, he owned the way my hands moved. He was claiming that the jig I designed in my head and built with my own money was his property. Because I had the idea while I was on his payroll. It was absurd. It was desperate. But it was also dangerous. A lawsuit like this could freeze my bank account. It could scare Evan Klein away. It could tie me up in court for years while the legal fees bled me dry. I looked at the letter, and then I looked at the dark garage behind me. They wanted a fight. They wanted to drag me back into the mud with them. They thought I would be scared. They thought I was still the sister who folded, the daughter who stayed silent to keep the peace. I folded the letter and put it in my back pocket. I was not going to send the designs back. I was not going to surrender. I took out my phone and dialed Tessa. "It is late, Paisley," she answered, her voice sleepy. "Wake up," I said. "Logan just declared war. He wants to sue me for stealing my own talent." "Send me a picture of the letter," Tessa said, her voice instantly sharp. "I will," I said. "But Tessa, do not just write a defense. I want you to prepare the countersuit regarding the fraudulent use of my credentials on the state bid." "You want to pull the trigger?" Tessa asked. "No," I said, looking at the stars above the rusted roof of my shop. "I want to drop the bomb." I hung up. I walked back into the shop and turned the lights out. I was not afraid. For the first time, I realized that they were not attacking me because I was weak. They were attacking me because they knew, better than anyone else, that I was the only thing that had ever made them strong. And now, I was going to show them what that strength looked like when it was aimed back at them. For the next week, my welding table became a desk, and my shop became a war room. Tessa Monroe was not just a lawyer. She was a forensic excavator. She dug through the strata of my digital life with the same precision I used to bevel a pipe. We built a fortress out of paper. Every single tool in my possession, from the $3,000 Miller Dynasty welder to the $6 wire brush, was matched to a bank transaction on my personal statement. "Look at this," Tessa said, highlighting a row on her spreadsheet. "Logan's lawyer claims the intellectual property for the spiral jig belongs to the company because it was built on company time. But here is the receipt for the raw steel and the toggle clamps. Date of purchase: Saturday, July 12th. Time, 9 in the morning. I remember that day," I said, pouring coffee from a thermos. "The shop was closed. I went in alone because I had an idea." "Exactly," Tessa said, tapping the screen. "You were off the clock. You bought the materials. You designed it. You built it. Under Ohio law, without a specific written agreement assigning those inventions to the employer, which they never made you sign because they thought you were just a grunt. That jig is yours. It is your personal property." We compiled a dossier that was 3 inches thick. It contained timestamps of KD files created on my personal laptop. It contained email chains where I sent designs to my personal address for safekeeping because the company server was crashing. It contained the terrifyingly detailed safety manual I had written, with the metadata proving I was the sole author. "We are not just going to defend you," Tessa said, closing the binder with a satisfying snap. "We are going to make them wish they had never learned to read." But Logan, true to his nature, did not fight with facts. He fought with rumors. On Tuesday, I got a call from Dave, the foreman at a local machining shop we used for overflow work. Dave was a good guy, the kind who measured twice and cut once. "Paisley," Dave said, his voice low, "I thought you should know. Your brother called me this morning." "Let me guess," I said. "He told you to stop taking my calls?" "Worse," Dave said. "He told me you were having a mental health crisis. He said you were unstable and that you had stolen dangerous equipment. He implied you might be a safety risk to anyone working with you." I gripped the phone. "And what did you say, Dave?" I told him that the only safety risk I ever saw at Carter and Forge was him walking onto the floor in dress shoes. Dave snorted. Then I asked him for the specs on the bearing housing he wanted us to machine. He couldn't answer. He told me he would circle back. I told him not to bother. "Thanks, Dave," I said. "I am sending the overflow work to Red Ember from now on." "Paisley," Dave said, "I do not work with people who badmouth the best hands in the county." Logan's smear campaign was backfiring. He forgot that in the trades, reputation is not built on LinkedIn posts. It is built on the work. Everyone knew who did the work. Logan was trying to destroy my character, but he was only revealing his own desperation. Then, the dominoes began to fall, and they fell fast. It started with the steel. On Wednesday afternoon, I was at the supply yard picking up a few lengths of angle iron. The yard manager, a gruff man named Harlan, who had known my father for 30 years, waved me over to the loading dock. "Paisley," Harlan said, chewing on a toothpick. I had to cut them off. He did not have to specify who them was. "What happened?" I asked. "Your dad, or the kid, I guess, put in an order for 10 tons of plate yesterday," Harlan said. "Big order, rush delivery. I ran the credit check. The insurance company denied it." "Denied it?" I asked. "Frank always paid within 60 days. He was slow, but he paid." "Not lately," Harlan said, lowering his voice. "And it is not just the late payments. The financials they submitted for the credit review, they did not smell right. The receivables looked inflated, like way inflated. My underwriter took one look at their projected income versus their bank balance and flagged the account for fraud review." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November wind. "So they cannot buy steel?" I asked. "Cash only," Harlan said. "And I know they do not have the cash for 10 tons of plate. If they cannot get the material, they cannot build the orders. If they cannot build, they cannot invoice. It is a death spiral. Paisley." I drove back to my garage in silence. The noose was tightening. On Thursday, the shop at Carter and Forge went silent. I heard about it from one of the junior welders, a kid named Marcus I had trained. He texted me at noon. "State inspectors are here. They shut down the main bay. Red tagged the crane." I called him immediately. "Marcus, what happened? Did someone get hurt?" "No," Marcus whispered. "It was an anonymous tip. Someone called the State Labor Board and reported that the ventilation system wasn't up to code and that the overhead crane hadn't been inspected in 2 years. "Was it you?" I asked. "No," Marcus said. "But I think it might have been the new foreman Logan hired. The guy quit this morning screaming about liability. I think he made the call on his way out of the parking lot." My stomach turned. I had not called the inspectors. I wanted them to fail. Yes, but I did not want the guys on the floor to lose their paychecks. But this was the inevitable result of Logan's cost-saving measures. He had skipped the crane inspections to save $500. Now, the entire production line was paralyzed. That afternoon, Evan Klein pulled up to my garage in his pristine white pickup truck. He walked in, holding a leather portfolio. He looked around at my setup, the sparks flying, the smell of grinding dust, the raw energy of the place. He smiled. "Now this," Evan said, shouting over the noise of the exhaust fan. "This looks like a fabrication shop." I turned off the grinder. "It is getting there." "I heard about Carter and Forge," Evan said, placing the portfolio on my workbench. "Halted production, red-tagged equipment. It is over. Paisley. They might recover," I said, though I did not believe it. "No, they won't," Evan said, "because I am officially terminating their contract for cause, breach of schedule, breach of safety compliance, and I am reassigning the entire remaining balance of the project to Red Ember Fabrication." He opened the portfolio and laid out a document. It was thick. It was heavy. "There is one condition," Evan said, uncapping a pen. "The state requires a certified technical director on record for the warranty paperwork. I need you to sign here, confirming that you are the primary technical authority for the Riverfront project." I looked at the line. Technical Director, Paisley Hughes. It was the title they had stolen from me. It was the title they had faked to get the job. And now, I was signing it for real, on my own terms, in my own shop. "If I sign this," I said, looking at Evan, "it guarantees they lose the contract, they lose the revenue, they default on the loan. They lost the contract the minute your brother decided he knew more about steel than you do," Evan said. "Sign the paper. Paisley. Claim your work." I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name. The ink was black and permanent. The moment I signed, I felt the final severance. I had just cut the lifeline. That night, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, a local area code. I assumed it was a supplier or a new client. "Red Ember Fabrication," I answered. "Paisley?" The voice was ragged. Breathless. It sounded like a woman who had been running for miles. "Mom?" I asked. I am on a burner phone," Marla whispered. "Frank took my cell. He is smashing things. Paisley. He is in the office smashing the computers." "Mom, slow down," I said, standing up. "What is going on?" "The bank called," she sobbed. "They are calling the loan. The whole thing. Immediate repayment. They found out about the contract cancellation. They found out about the audit." "I know," I said. "I am sorry, Mom, but I warned Frank." "You have to help us," Marla begged. Her voice cracked into a high, hysterical keen. "You have money now. I know you do. Evan told Logan he paid you in advance. You have to give it to us. You have to wire it to the operating account tonight, just to cover payroll, just to keep the lights on for one more week." "I cannot do that, Mom," I said gently. "That money is for materials. It is for the project." "We are your parents," she screamed. "We fed you. We clothed you. How can you be so selfish? We did this for you. We wanted to build something big for the family." "You did not do it for me," I said. "You did it for Logan. You leveraged the shop to fund his gambling." "Logan didn't know," Marla blurted out. The line went silent. "What did you say?" I asked. "Logan?" Marla's breathing was jagged. He had the idea, but the numbers, the application for the loan." "Mom," I said, a terrible realization dawning on me. "Who filled out the loan application? Who prepared the profit and loss statements for Apex Capital?" "I did," she whispered. I sat down on the floor of my shop. "You cooked the books," I said. It was not a question. I adjusted the projections," she stammered. "Logan said the startup was a sure thing. He said we just needed the capital, but the bank wouldn't lend to us based on the real numbers. So I moved some expenses to the next quarter. I counted some pending bids as signed contracts. I just wanted to help him. Paisley. He is so brilliant. He just needed a chance." "You committed fraud," I said. "You committed federal bank fraud to get a loan for a Ponzi scheme." "I was protecting the family image," she cried. We couldn't let people think we were struggling. What would the neighbors think? What would the club think? The image, I repeated. You destroyed the reality to save the image. It was the ultimate twist. It wasn't just Logan's incompetence, it was Marla's vanity. She had falsified the financial health of the company, lied to the lenders, and put the house and the shop on the line, all because she couldn't bear the thought of her golden son failing or the neighbors knowing they were cash poor. "And you wanted me to come back," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You wanted me to be a partner. If I had signed those papers, if I had accepted that 10%, I would have been liable for your fraud. You tried to frame me. No. We just wanted you to work," Marla sobbed. "If you worked hard enough, we could pay it back before anyone noticed." I am hanging up now. "Marla," I said. "Paisley, please, they are going to take the house." "You gave them the house," I said. 6 months ago, I ended the call. I stared at the phone. They were not just bad business owners, they were criminals, and they had almost turned me into an accomplice. The end came 48 hours later. I did not have to guess what happened. I watched it unfold in the public record. Apex Growth Capital filed for an emergency injunction to freeze the assets of Carter and Forge. They seized the accounts. They locked the gates. Logan tried one last, desperate maneuver. Tessa called me to tell me about it. "You are not going to believe this," Tessa said, sounding almost impressed by the audacity. "Logan went to the bank this morning. He tried to claim that the loan was invalid because you were the technical partner and you didn't sign off on it. He tried to throw you under the bus one last time. He claimed you were the secret partner who embezzled the funds." "And?" I asked. "And the bank laughed at him," Tessa said. "They have the loan documents. Paisley, they have the signatures. Frank signed as owner, Marla signed as CFO, Logan signed as witness. Your name is nowhere on that debt. The paper trail is bulletproof. He just admitted to them that he knew about the loan, confirming his own liability." It was over. The house of cards had not just fallen, it had incinerated. 2 weeks later, the notification appeared on the county auction site. Notice of public auction assets of Carter Forge Metalworks, LLC. By order of secured creditors. December 15th. Location, 1500 Industrial Way. I scrolled through the PDF list of items. Lot 101, 2018 Ford F-250 utility truck. Lot 102, Miller Dimension 452. Welders, QD4, Lot 103, hydraulic press brake, 100 ton. It was a catalog of my life, every machine I had calibrated, every truck I had driven. My fingers stopped scrolling. I froze. Lot 205, antique cast, iron anvil, approx. 300,000 ohms, identifying marks. Hughes, 1945. The anvil. It was my grandfather's. It was the anvil he had brought back from the war. It was the anvil where he had taught me how to flatten a rivet when I was 6 years old. It was the heart of the shop. Frank had promised me, when I was 10, that one day it would be mine. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't collateral. It was the soul of the family, or at least the soul of what the family used to be before the rot set in, and they had let it go to the auction block. They hadn't even tried to save it. They had probably listed it as scrap metal on the inventory sheet. I looked at my bank account. The riverfront deposit was there. The first payment from Evan for the completed spiral section had just cleared. I had money, real money, my money. I grabbed my coat. "Tessa," I texted, "I am going to the auction." "Do not buy the shop. Paisley," she replied instantly. "It is a toxic asset." "I do not want the shop," I typed back. "I am going for the heart." I walked out to my truck. The air was crisp and cold. I wasn't going back as a daughter. I wasn't going back as an employee. I was going back as a bidder. And unlike my family, I had the funds to back up my bid. The sound of a liquidation auction is unique. It is the sound of a vulture picking a carcass clean, set to the rhythmic, rapid-fire chant of an auctioneer who does not care about the history of the bones he is selling. I stood in the back of the warehouse on Industrial Way. It was December 15th. The heating system had been shut off by the utility company 3 days prior, so the air inside was colder than the air outside. It was a stagnant, dead cold that smelled of dust and failure. The space was crowded. There were scrap dealers from Cleveland, looking for cheap steel. There were competitors from the next county, looking to pick up our machines for pennies on the dollar. And there were the curious locals, the people who just wanted to see the end of the Hughes dynasty with their own eyes. I wore a dark wool coat and a beanie pulled low. I did not want to be recognized, but more importantly, I did not want to be spoken to. I was not there to gloat. I was not there to point a finger and scream. I told you so. I was there to witness the physics of consequence. Frank and Marla were standing near the loading dock door, huddled together. Frank looked like a ghost. His skin was gray, and he was staring at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with the men who were buying his life's work. Marla was wearing her fur coat, the one she bought the year we landed the hospital contract, but it looked ridiculous now, like a costume worn to a tragedy. She was weeping softly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, playing the victim until the very last second. And Logan was pacing near the auctioneer's podium. He was still wearing a suit. He was arguing with a man in a windbreaker, one of the bank representatives. I could hear snippets of Logan's voice cutting through the low murmur of the crowd. He was using his hands, chopping the air aggressively. "This is a strategic divestment," Logan was saying, loud enough for people to hear. "We are pivoting. The hardware is just overhead. We are moving into a consulting phase." The bank representative just shook his head and turned his back on him. Logan looked around, desperate for an audience, desperate for someone to believe the spin he was still trying to sell even as the walls fell down. The auctioneer slammed his gavel. Bam! "Sold," he droned into the microphone. "Lot 103, the hydraulic press brake, sold to bidder number 42 for $12,000. I felt a twinge in my chest. That press brake. I had calibrated the back gauge on that machine 1,000 times. I knew exactly how to feather the pedal to get a perfect 90-degree bend. Now, it belonged to a guy named Miller who ran a shop in Dayton. "Lot 104, the auctioneer chanted. "Miller Dimension Welders, batch of 4. These were my machines. These were the stations where I had taught the apprentices. These were the machines that had built the library, the stadium gates, the hospital railings. "Sold for $800 each, the auctioneer said. It was an insult. They were worth 3 times that. But that is the reality of a fire sale. When you have no leverage, the market eats you alive. I watched the machines get tagged with yellow stickers. It felt like watching parts of my own body being sold off. But then I touched the pocket of my coat, where the key to my garage on Cinder Lane sat heavy and real. Those machines were just copper and steel. I could buy new machines. In fact, I already had. The skill to run them was not up for auction. That was standing right here, in the back of the room, keeping its hands in its pockets. The auction moved quickly. The office furniture, the computers, wiped clean, presumably, the forklift. Then came the smaller items, the contents of the tool crib. "Lot 205, the auctioneer said. 2 assistants struggled to drag a heavy pallet into the center of the ring. On the pallet sat a black, cast-iron shape. It was the anvil. It was a 300-pound block of iron, forged in 1945. It was pitted and scarred. The top surface, the face, shined with a dull silver luster from 80 years of hammers striking hot steel against it. My grandfather had bought this anvil when he came back from the war. He had started the business with this anvil and a coal forge in a shed behind his house. It was not a machine. It did not have a plug. It did not depreciate. It was the altar. Frank looked up. For the first time, he showed a flicker of actual pain. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out instinctively, but Marla pulled him back, whispering something in his ear, probably telling him it was heavy and dirty, and they had nowhere to put it in the condo they were being forced to downsize into. "Antique anvil," the auctioneer said, sounding bored. "Start the bidding at $100. Silence. The scrap dealers didn't want it. It was too heavy to move, and the scrap value of cast iron was low. The competitors didn't want it. They had modern fabrication tables. $50? The auctioneer asked. Anyone? $50 for a boat anchor? Logan let out a sharp, derisive laugh. Scrap it, he muttered loud enough to be heard. It is obsolete. That was the moment. That was the final seal on the coffin. He called our history a boat anchor. He called the foundation of his inheritance obsolete. I raised my bidder card. Number 77. $50 to number 77, the auctioneer said. Do I hear 60? The room was silent. I saw Frank turn. He squinted into the gloom of the warehouse. He saw me. His eyes widened. He grabbed Marla's arm. They both stared. Logan spun around. He saw me standing there, calm, unmoving, holding the card up, his face twisted. It was a mask of pure, distilled venom. He took a step toward me. Sold. The auctioneer slammed the gavel. $50 to bidder 77. I walked forward. The crowd parted. They knew who I was. They knew the story, or at least, the rumors of it. They looked at me with a mix of curiosity and respect. I walked right up to the pallet. I placed my hand on the horn of the anvil. It was ice cold, but it felt like it was humming. Logan rushed over. He invaded my personal space, his face red. You, he hissed. You came here to humiliate us? You came here to pick over the bones? I came to buy my tools, I said calmly. Something you never learned how to use. This is family property, Logan shouted. You have no right. It was lot 205, I said, and I have the receipt. I will sue you, Logan screamed. He was losing it now. The facade of the cool businessman was gone. He was a tantrum-throwing child in a suit. I will sue you for everything you have. That anvil belongs to the company. Mr. Hughes, a deep voice cut in. It was the bank representative, a large man in a gray overcoat. He stepped between Logan and me. The anvil was an asset of the LLC, the banker said, his voice bored and official. The LLC has defaulted. The assets have been liquidated. This lady is the legal owner of the item. Step back. But she is the one who ruined us. Logan pointed a shaking finger at me. She stole our designs. She sabotaged our contracts. Mr. Hughes, the banker said, sharper this time. We have seen the books. We have seen the loan documents. We know exactly who ruined this company. Now, step back, or I will have the deputy escort you off the premises. Logan froze. He looked around the room. He saw the faces of the neighbors, the competitors, the former employees. He saw the pity and the judgment. He realized, finally, that his slide deck could not save him here. There was no one left to charm. He deflated. He turned and walked away, pushing past his parents, disappearing out the side door into the cold. I did not watch him go. I looked at Frank. He broke away from Marla and walked over to me. He looked at the anvil, then at me. There were tears in his eyes. Real ones this time. Paisley, he croaked. Con, I am sorry. We didn't know it would end like this. He wanted me to say it was okay. He wanted me to tell him that it was just business, that we were still family, that I would help them pick up the pieces. I looked at him. I remembered the deed in the trash. I remembered the fake resume. I remembered him asking me to pay off his loan shark. I know you didn't, Frank, I said. That is the problem. You never knew anything. You just let it happen. Can we, he started, reaching a hand out. Can we talk? Maybe we can start over? With your new shop? He was doing it again, even now, at the bottom of the pit. He was looking for a ladder to climb on, and I was the ladder. I stepped back. No, I said. But you bought the anvil, he whispered. That means you care about the legacy. I bought the anvil because I am a blacksmith, I said. You are just a man who used to own a shop. I signaled to the two guys I had hired to help me load. They brought the dolly over. Let us go, I said to them. I walked out of the warehouse. I did not look back at Frank. I did not look back at Marla. I left them in the cold, empty shell of their own making. I drove the anvil to Cinder Lane. We unloaded it in the center of the shop, right under the main overhead light. I bolted it to a new stump of white oak I had prepared. It looked good there. It looked right. The closure did not come from their apology. It came from the sound of that heavy iron settling onto my floor. It came from the realization that I did not need their permission to exist. 6 months later, the garage on Cinder Lane looks different now. We painted the walls a bright, clean white. The weeds are gone, replaced by a paved lot. The sign above the door says Red Ember Fabrication in simple, bold steel letters. Letters I cut myself. The shop is loud. It is the good kind of loud. The hum of 3 TIG welders running simultaneously. The screech of the band saw. The laughter of the crew during break time. I have 3 employees now. There is Marcus, the kid from the old shop. I hired him the day after the auction. He is my lead fabricator now. There is Sarah, a 19-year-old trade school graduate who reminds me of myself at that age. Only she is louder and more confident because nobody tells her she should be in the office. And there is Dave, the old machinist, who comes in part-time to handle the complex turning work. We pay $28 an hour to start. We have full health benefits. We have a safety meeting every Monday morning, and it is not a formality. It is a religion. The riverfront walkway is finished. It gleams in the sun down by the water. A ribbon of stainless steel that will last for 100 years. Every time I drive past it, I see people walking on it, leaning on the rails, trusting their lives to my welds. I was cleaning up the shop last night. Everyone had gone home. It was just me and the hum of the transformer. I walked over to the anvil. I picked up my favorite hammer. I tapped the face of the anvil. Ring. It was a clear, bell-like tone. It sang. For years. I thought my legacy was my last name. I thought it was something I had to inherit. Something I had to wait for. Something I had to earn by suffering in silence. I was wrong. Legacy is not what you are given. It is what you build. It is the quality of the arc you strike. It is the way you treat the people who work next to you. It is the refusal to accept a lie just because it is comfortable. My parents are currently living in a small apartment in Florida. I do not talk to them. I send a card on Christmas. But I do not sign it with love. I just sign it Paisley. Logan is working in sales for a software company. I heard he tells people he exited the manufacturing sector because it was too volatile. I did not exit. I entered. I looked at the anvil one last time before turning out the lights. It is not Frank's anvil anymore. It is not my grandfather's anvil anymore. It is mine. And tomorrow, we have a lot of steel to bend. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below and let me know. Let us share our thoughts and connect with each other. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the channel Helena Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people who might need to hear it.